Hello, and welcome to ACDD's live panel discussion about post-war Artsakh. My name is Tony Ordukhanyan, Chairman of the ACDD and Vice President of the BSA. Our panelists today include geopolitical analyst Richel Moyan, PCC Political Science Professor Oznit Mkhitaryan, and our very own BSA President Andrei Dionysyan. I will be moderating this discussion as we dive deep into the topics of geopolitics, humanitarian crises, and the overall aftermath of the war. We hope you learned something new from this discussion and that inspires you to research more about Artsakh. Thank you.
So essentially what you had was the Baku and Sumgait pogroms, which essentially initiated the violence between Azerbaijanis and Armenians, essentially. And the reason for that was the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic, given its autonomy inside of Azerbaijan, had a much more Armenian identity, and this is seen through its population, this is seen through cultural indicators. And when we look at that, and when you have Nagorno-Karabakh looking to become its own country, really, Azerbaijan did not want that towards the end of the Soviet Union, of what ended up being the collapse in 1991. Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Nagorno-Karabakh, which is now known as Artsakh by locals, declared independence. However, Azerbaijan did not want that. Azerbaijan revoked autonomy of Nagorno-Karabakh the year it declared independence, and therefore the war began from 1992 to 1994 until a ceasefire was reached between Armenia and Azerbaijan, brokered by the French, the Russians, and the Americans, who are OSCE co-chairmen, or I guess I could call the country's co-chairs. Now, with that background, it frozen conflict is what we would call this, right? And it was thawing in the 2010s, and we saw that with the 2016 April war that took place, and it was only 4 days. And in 2020, we saw a continuation, which essentially brought more players to the conflict, because this was really a small conflict between state-to-state Armenia, ethnic Armenians of Artsakh versus Azerbaijan, but the ethnic Armenians of Artsakh were backed by the Armenians, the Republic of Armenia, given that Armenia wanted to declare that they were the main securator of the guarantee of the local peoples. Now, in 2020, we saw Turkey being much more active. Indicators of interest would be in the energy sector, most probably, and also bringing a political sphere of influence into Azerbaijan, which is historically a Russian sphere of influence, given its background in Soviet Union, and even prior to that in the Russian Empire. And even before that, the whole Caucasus has been a point of interest for the Ottomans, the Russians, and the Persians at the time. Now, 2020, how did it start? Well, we saw in July, we saw skirmishes in Tavush region, and then in September, an all-out war broke out on September 27th, to be exact, and concluded on November 10th, November 11th, local time, of what was known as the Trilateral Agreement. And following what we have is essentially approximately, they're saying 5,000 deaths on each side. Relatively, this number could be very incorrect for the time being. We won't know until a couple of years from now. But that's, I think, a quick summary of how this broke out.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moyan. By the way, my audio is coming out well too, right now?
It's all good.
Okay. Just making sure whenever I mute and unmute. So with that given summary that Mr. Moyan has given us, Professor Mkhitaryan, is there anything you would like to add on before we get to the first question?
The only thing I'd like to add is that something very interesting occurred when we're talking about independence or autonomy of this region. This independent oblast under the Soviet Union had a mechanism. So the Soviet Union had a mechanism for secession, had legal mechanisms for secession. So Artsakh, or Karabakh at the time, went through the legal process of getting secession under Soviet law, just like Georgia, just like Ukraine, just like Azerbaijan. So technically, under that umbrella, there was a legal mechanism for independence, which they went through. They went through that legal mechanism, and then they went through a war, and they had a ceasefire, and they still, for their independence. So they went through all of the proper mechanisms for independence. That's what I would like to say.
Okay, so this leads us to our first question very well, in which, as it flows, the legal status of Artsakh. So, Professor Mkhitaryan, how would we say the legal status is of Nagorno-Karabakh at this time?
Well, we'd have to consider there's two principles we're looking at, right? If we're looking at the legality or the sovereignty of a nation or a region, we're looking at two principles here for us. One is this idea of territorial sovereignty, and two is this idea of indigenous rights to land. Like, these are the two principles we're sort of looking at right now. If we look at it from the territorial integrity part of it, everybody ignored the principles that existed under Soviet law for independence for the region and just deferred to Azerbaijan ignoring it. So we fall under territorially, Karabakh, Artsakh falls under legally right now Azerbaijan, because nobody recognized it as an independent country. So it didn't have territorial integrity ultimately. However, if we look at the mechanisms in place for independence, it followed all the rules, like it followed all the laws that there were in place. So we were talking about these two principles. So I guess it depends on where you fall in this argument, whether we're talking about territorial integrity or we're talking about the principle of autonomy. So these are the two places. Right now, legally, we passed a post-war. We have no answers. We don't have a resolution to this region. There are no answers for us right now. We know what we've lost, but we don't really have answers as to what this territory, what kind of autonomy this territory is going to be able to maintain, or is it not going to be able to maintain any autonomy.
Thank you, Professor Mkhitaryan. Mr. Elmoyan, anything you would like to add on to that?
She mentioned right on the dot. One thing that I've been kind of focusing more on as well is that law of secession, right? Given that the USSR had a mechanism on how to leave. If we look at daily activities, we have an operation to it, right? Which is essentially how, as humans, we operate. And I'm reading right now, Article 3 in the law of secession mentions in a union republic, which includes within its structure autonomous republics, autonomous oblasts, or autonomous okrugs, the referendum is held separately for each autonomous formation. The people of autonomous republics and autonomous formations retain the right to decide independently the question of remaining within the USSR or within the seceding Union Republic, and also to raise the question of their own state legal status. Now, with that being said, this creates an awkward circumstance, which let's mention about the communication aspect of this as well. The Soviet Union, the West, had a very strong buffer in understanding each other's cultures. Realistically, when we understand how the West views post-Soviet countries, usually they're remembering the Cold War or some kind of mentality like that. So when 1992, when essentially the UN was really taking on these new countries and accepting them as part of their realm of communications, also came the confusion that a war broke out from 1992 and until 1994, and the borders were not very clear to the Western world. And this was very clear into where, a lot of the countries throughout the world recognize this area as Azerbaijan, but that won't necessarily translate on a local level. And now we're in a circumstance where you have Russian peacekeepers in the region, which are showing daily maps of what the borders look like, but it won't necessarily translate to, for example, if you go on Google Earth or Google Maps. So that's kind of what I just wanted to add on to that. And in terms of the legal status of if you're interested to look more into this, law of secession is the name of it.
Thank you, Mr. Elmoyan. Mr. Dionysian, is there anything you would like to add on this question? President Dionysian, I'd like to note that you are muted and we can't.
Sorry, yeah, I got it. As I'll continue to note throughout the night, I am not even remotely as fluent in this issue. But something that does quite bother me is, as Mr. Elmoyan mentioned, the seeming gap of understanding between what the Soviets had set up and the UN then looking at the situation and kind of scratching their head, because they did pass that resolution. They passed something that was recognizing Nagorno-Karabakh as, I believe, under Azerbaijani territory. And then I don't remember exactly what happened with that, but I do remember seeing that at one point. The point being, there is a great deal of confusion in trying to understand as Rich said, there was a barrier. I know very little about this. I'm trying to play catch up, but that I believe is one of the biggest hindrances to really being able to comprehend the situation and resolve it from your Western centric perspective.
So Andre was bringing up like how he said at the end the Western perspective, but then also we have the whole worldwide perspective. People have been knowing about this event when it took place in October. The UN reacted to it in a very light manner, and other countries were concerned or in support of Turkey or in support of Azerbaijan, in support of Armenia. There was different kinds of reactions. So that leads me to my next question. I'm going to pass it this time to Mr. Lemoyan. How does the US, how does the EU, the UN view the situation? How do these countries react to this event? How has it created this kind of division between pro-Armenia or pro-Azerbaijan?
Well, the U.S. is a OSCE co-chair, which completely dropped the ball in 2020, given that a ceasefire was broken during the war. Continuously it was broken. One was broken through a Russian brokered one was broken through the French, and one was brokered through Trump, which many of us heard, and we saw the thumbs up to the local rallies and whatnot. And so how do they view this situation? The EU wants partnership in this area. EU also wants energy from this area. Azerbaijan has a very important pipeline that goes through Tbilisi and through Turkey and ultimately to the European Union, which is very important interest given that energy security is one of the most important concepts in today's age, in the 21st century at least. Now, especially with the sanctions set on Russia, especially with the relationship they have, a very delicate relationship, Azerbaijani oil, or I guess we can just call it energy in this case, is much more appealing to European Union. Of course, the human rights records are nearly not as mentioned as the Russian human rights mentioned in the Western world. Therefore, Azerbaijan becomes a more interesting PR situation, I would argue, for the European Union, which means they're going to strongly suggest stuff, but they're not going to enforce it. The United States, in this case, has been pretty lackadaisical since the early 2000s, since their foreign policy shifted towards the Middle East more so. And therefore, they haven't really been interested in this area. Obama showed some interest in the late 2000s, but it really didn't go anywhere other than, trying to mend ties between Turkey and Armenia, which is a difficult case in itself. So the U.S. has really lost control of this area. Biden is looking to come back and provide some kind of influence in this region, given that Georgia is a U.S. ally, and that area is much more accessible for the United States. But Armenia still is very much so under Russian influence. And if we understand anything from the geopolitical makeup of the region, it plans on staying in that way, given that we have air bases in Armenia that are Russian. They're looking to expand more so on the eastern side of it, given that the border with Azerbaijan needs to be secure more than ever, as well as to counter the Kars and Igdir Turkish bases in that region. So you really have a NATO ally like Turkey for US in the region, and I can't imagine that changing. Sorry, and in terms of the UN in this case, I would say has just been non-existent. I can't speak too much on the UN given that my expertise are not necessarily in that world, but I can say the UN has been pretty absent and has not been any source of provided any source of voice for this region.
Professor Mkhitaryan, anything you would like to add to this question?
I think Rich just nailed it completely. I think in 2 words, really, you could say like pipelines and gold mines. This is a resource-rich area, and it is a transit area. There are interests that are greater than nationalism. Nationalism is a wonderful tool to use when interests are so great, and that's what we've seen be used. But I think the interests are many, and this tells us why. When we've seen this region do everything legally, including legally doing a referendum for independence, fighting a war and winning it, getting a ceasefire for the war and holding territory, defending itself in the territory, showing historical heritage in the territory, has done everything legal, and we have seen the other side do very illegal acts during this time, including war crimes. Everybody seems to be silent, and so the question is why, and I think the why it holds true in every conflict. The why happens to be resources, and that's pretty much the sad truth. This is why you're getting this response. We're all all of us are seeing the same thing. We are all seeing the war crimes being committed. We all saw the white phosphorus. We all know what the territory is like. We all know the media being flooded with misinformation. Everybody is seeing it, including the people who are looking you in the face and saying, no, that's not true. They all know it. So when all of these things are aligning, the only place to really look are what are the interests and principles? What are the real interests here? And so I say Rich is absolutely right. We're looking at pipelines and gold mines, kind of.
Yeah, along with that, I also just wanted to quickly state something I've learned was that the U.S. has a nickname called the Leaders of the Free World. And I'm not going to try to go on too big of a tangent here. Andre smiles because he knows that he taught me that line. So, yay, credits to you, Andre. But something that I've learned is that if we're the leaders of the free world, why is it that we don't do too much to help those in need? Why is it that we stay too silent, too isolated from ourselves? Now I understand back in World War II, we had this isolationist perspective that we didn't want to get too involved with too many countries and these kinds of battles or wars or any situation in general. But then as these international affairs take place and that the US starts to become partners with different countries, then we see other countries in need, in dire help. And with these situations, why is it that the US stays silent? So it's something I've been considering too. And when I wear this pin, I've always symbolized it as the day that I hope that US and Armenia work together and that we can solve these situations, find the justice, find the tangible solutions. I know I'm speaking a little bit from like a little bit like an advocate's way. Again, I'm not so well versed either too much in this topic. I will be learning some stuff as we discuss, but I do know a little bit here and there. It's just I think that the US also needs to be much more involved with these kinds of things taking place and help find these tangible solutions to such situations. Mr. Dionysian.
Yeah, if I could just jump in for a second. I mean, it is deeply concerning. Of course, when it comes to this region, Rich, spot on. It is entirely about resources, and when we say resources, we mean energy, basically oil. And I mean, there is reason to be a little bit optimistic. A little, very, very little. Was it today or yesterday? I think it was just this morning, where the U.S. Announced that they knew for a fact, the State Department knew for a fact that the Saudi Crown Prince ordered the assassination of the reporter Khashoggi. And this, I'm sure the intelligence isn't new, but making it public is a huge step politically. It's a huge gamble because Saudi Arabia is what we consider a strategic partnership, which basically means, well, we don't really like what they're doing, but oil. And so I think it is an indication, at least, that the Biden administration is willing to stick their neck out a little bit, at least. Now, whether that, we don't know exactly what's going on in the Situation Room. This could be some three-dimensional chess to get something else that they want, or it could be they honestly are worried about human rights violations. Hopefully it's that. We did see they started doing airstrikes in Syria, and like there was a whole article in the New York Times this morning saying, is America coming back as the world's police? Is that actually going to reestablish itself? And I don't know. Maybe we are, maybe we aren't. I know people who would be very happy if we are. I know people who would be very angry if we were. But I think the U.S. is going to start to play a larger role. And in theory, if it's carried out properly, it can maybe negate the power of Russia, because Russia is an enormous power in the region. I mean, we don't think of Russia as the big bad global superpower anymore. There are some people who don't even classify Russia as a superpower anymore, just because their power on a global scale is diminished a little bit. But regionally, they rule with iron fist. It is very much an oligarchy. I think I joked about it with my AP Gov teacher that right now Russia is as if the mob ran a country. And if one of their satellite states, because they're post-Soviet nations. They're basically still satellite states. If they step out of line, Vladimir Putin's gonna, come down and wag his finger at you. I don't know. They are pretty influential there, but hopefully something comes from the Biden administration's new approach.
And hopefully something does come from that approach, as Andre said. Moving on to our next question. Many effects have taken place, not just emotionally, but physically. We've seen many people with mental effects, many people with injuries, many people have died, obviously. And a lot of these effects have affected the way, oh my God, I said affect a lot. These effects, though, they have brought many situations to Armenia. And aside from the whole division between pro-Pashinyan and anti-Pashinyan, my question, I'm going to start off with Professor Mkhitaryan on this one. What is the extent of such humanitarian crises taking place in Armenia and in Artsakh?
Right now, it seems that Armenia itself doesn't have the infrastructure to take care of the humanitarian crisis that is taking place and that we really are enduring right now. And a lot of the gaps are being filled by Diaspora organizations, some NGOs, and this has always been the case. This is not anything new. I think it's going to be quite a while before we get to a place where we're sort of standing up on our own 2 feet in this realm. So the humanitarian crisis is vast, but in order for us to even begin to assess and move forward, we really have to figure out politically how are we going to show political stability. There's a few things that are going on. One, like politically, we are very unstable right now, clearly, but also our identity and our understanding of who we are as a nation, that's been shaken a bit for both the Diaspora Armenians and then the Armenians in Armenia and then Artsakh. This has been a big shakeup for us, a reality check in some way. A lot of myths have fallen, and something that holds all countries together are these myths that we all hold to be true, and a bunch of these have fallen. So the first thing that, aside from reaching out to injured soldiers, psychological help and the distress and the homeless, now we have refugees. Again, we've lost territory. Again, we have refugees. Again, so this all taps into sort of this transgenerational traumas that we all live with now already, and this is added. It's a compounded effect. But I don't know if the country itself, if you're asking me politically, I don't know if the country itself has the infrastructure or the stability to really do much about this in a tangible way. So I think one of the things we're going to need to do is figure out where we are. What is the political identity now of Armenia? We're oscillating between two things. We seem to only have these two options, and the events from yesterday sort of point to that as well. So we don't seem to have many options right now in terms of politically what is going to happen. Where do we stand? Are we going with sort of the Pashinyan idea of this velvet revolution and move forward? Or it seems the only other option people feel is that they have the past oligarchic ideals. And we need sort of some sort of legitimacy for the government before we can move on. Even if we're saying, a majority of people, it appears in Armenia, still are supporting Pashinyan, or at least a small majority of people, there is some break in this legitimacy, and we have to reestablish legitimacy and broaden that base and figure out where we stand as a government. Economically, militarily, politically, we're very shaky. Our civil society, however, which is not shaky, it's kind of vibrant and amazing to watch. One of the ways you look at the health of a country or the health of a democracy is looking at civil society movements. We now have these two vibrant civil society movements moving towards each other, and they're not being violent, really. They're being allowed to express. That's something to be proud of, specifically for this country and specifically for that region. We are kind of unique in that region, and so we really have something to be proud of there. That's pretty impressive, and I don't think everything that we look at is through this negative lens. That's one of the things that we can look at and say, wow, we're pretty cool in that way. That's a very impressive thing that our country is able to maintain in this environment.
Yeah, as she said, although there's this division between us, we still are taking this as civilly as possible for the most part. Pro or anti-Pashinyan, everybody of these two factions is trying to debate each other and discuss with each other the kinds of effects and such consequences that may take place no matter how the outcome is. Mr. Moyen, go ahead. I'm sorry, I should have let you go.
No, don't apologize. No, agreed. I mean, as you mentioned it, just like one of my favorite political consultants, Eric Akopian, mentions, you know, that is something to be proud of. The fact that we've lost the war, thousands of people have died, not by choice of going to war, by the way, it was imposed. And now you're in political turmoil in some cases domestically. And there's still civil disagreements happening on the street, which is essentially a crowd of a couple of thousand on each side. It's insane to think that an area very close to, for example, Chechnya, very close to the Middle East, where it has its own issues, it's still holding its own. So that is one good to mention. However, on the other hand, we do have, like during the war, you had 90,000 people that had to flee, which is essentially 60% of the population of Artsakh. You have the physical aspect of it as well, where you have the post-war effects of injuries. You know, many are injured, many are psychologically going through a lot, and not to mention, you also have the trauma of the borders, right? Like, for example, the borders are not the same as what they were prior to the war beginning, and now you are noticing the very small, very slim region, Syunik province has new borders where essentially you have Azerbaijan on both sides, and it's a very mountainous region. So depending on where you are, there's an elevation advantage on Azerbaijan's side that is quite terrifying for Armenians that have a cultural, as you mentioned, the transgenerational trauma. So, you know, in this case, when we look at it, we also have to understand the well-being of the people continued from this. And you're hoping that there's no migration based off of an existential threat to begin with, given that the Armenians not only have this recent trauma, you also have the genocide, but also you have the cultural connection of the genocide oppressors with Azerbaijanis, given that Armenians in the local region won't necessarily consider them Azerbaijanis. They will mention Turk, which is essentially the word Turk. So you also have that effect. And you know, as you mentioned, a reality check. I think this is a reality check for many reading what just happened. I mean, I lived in Armenia from 2006 to 2009. People were acting like they won the war when it was simply a ceasefire in 1994. So there was this delusional idea that the conflict had ended when there wasn't real status of Nagorno-Karabakh through the OSCE Minsk Group, which was the form of how Armenia was committed to and still is committed to the process. So it's almost like you can avoid future humanitarian crises if you fulfill your duties in time. And the people, or I guess I should say the politicians, were not doing their job quite well. And this is a reality check for the Armenians of, you know, not just looking at the current administration, but you also have to look at since the second we became, you know, our own country. And not to mention, you also have, you know, like I mentioned, the humanitarian crisis, but now Russian is the official language in Nagorno-Karabakh, which if you look at it locally, the people are okay with that, given that it has probably one of the highest approval ratings of Russian presence in the region, given that, you know, historically, or even you can consider during the Soviet Union, Nagorno-Karabakh was thriving, especially in the 1980s. So, you know, there's effects into this that isn't only a humanitarian crisis in Artsakh, but you also have it in Armenia. For example, the infrastructure, like as you mentioned, it can't take on thousands of refugees. I mean, in a lot of the infrastructure that may take that on is not up to par. And this is, again, due to lack of infrastructure being supported outside of Yerevan. I mean, if you look at Gyumri still looks like it's 1989, for God's sakes, while Artsakh was rebuilt very well after the 1990s. So, you know, you have to look at these things and understand that this crisis goes far beyond. And not to mention, the Karvacha region in Artsakh had a major place in Armenian energy and Armenian food security. So in that region, it was essentially given, transferred back under the trilateral agreement, which is further exacerbating the issue, not only for this generation, but possibly for a long generation, given that you have to now forge relationships in your neighborhood if you're not going to get that from Artsakh, because Artsakh was almost like a self-sufficient region, exporting more than importing. So, and you're already seeing the activities with Iran, bilateral relations with Iran increasing, the following tripartite agreement, which is, I'm not sure how it's going to be implemented based off of the rhetoric from Azerbaijan, but essentially an economic route corridor through Mehri, which accesses the Azerbaijani territory of Nakhichevan and accesses mainland Azerbaijan. So I'm not sure how that's going to be implemented, but economically there has been moves made, but I'm not sure how it's going to be implemented. So as of right now, the humanitarian crisis is immense. Thank you.
I just want to add that not only that, but then we have this looming threat that is continuing, this like continuous threat, both in rhetoric and in what is to happen physically. Like it's just not, it's really, we don't know. That looming threat, I mean, they have been telling us exactly what they were going to do prior to the war, and they are now telling us what they're going to do. They're always telling us. They may not be telling Western media, or when they get on the BBC, they're not using the words, but just go and look through their messaging, and they are telling us. They've been telling us, and we became somehow complacent as a community, maybe because we so want it to be good. Like we so want it to function, and we want Armenia to be vibrant and democratic and have all of the principles that we respect and want. But we are in a region that requires serious pragmatism, and that some things I think have to be taken. A realism has to come in a very pragmatic way. We may have to check ourselves a bit and check what it is that we want for the country. Are we looking at immediate outcomes? Are we looking at outcomes in 5 years, in 10 years? Russia's known for not leaving. It's not likely that, I mean, who won in this? Who are the winners in this, the outcome in the ceasefire? For us, we lost. We also don't know what's coming. We don't know. We don't have any resolution to Artsakh. We don't know. That's not protected for us. Azerbaijan seems to have been the military winner, but now they have Turkish and Russian soldiers or people on their land. They have other countries in their land. Armenia itself has been shaken politically, domestically. What's to come, the continuous stress of the things to come, I think, and the uncertainty is compounding all of these effects. So I just want to add to that sort of, the humanitarian crisis is true, real, and tangible, physical and mental and emotional, but I think it is this ongoing what's to come, this continuous trauma.
If I can jump in for a second, it is really concerning. I was thinking about this at first. I was like, okay, well, this is historians are going to look back and say it's a proxy war, right? It's going to be a proxy war where Turkey was as a proxying through Azerbaijan, and Armenia was proxying through. And then just sitting here thinking about it, well, hold on. Armenia itself is a proxy for Russia. So this is like some sort of crazy 3D chess game being played where really the only winner is Vladimir Putin. And I mean, Turkey to an extent. Turkey does get to flex their muscles a little bit, but that causes them more problems with the West than it helps them, I think, at least, in strengthening their control over the region. Because Turkey's never had the best relationship with the West. They are more and more concerned, especially as as Saudi Arabia has become very concerned with their image in the West very recently, especially with MBS taking over. And remember, they went on this whole media tour when they were like touting MBS's, what was it called? Saudi Arabia, like 2030 something. Their little economic, it was like China's Belt and Road Initiative thing. But I think honestly, it very much depends on. Turkey acts very loudly when they move. They move in big strides and destructive strides. When Russia moves, it's under the radar. It's in the aftermath of a calamity, and they jump in and take advantage of an already broken situation. I mean, that's basically what we saw the Soviet Union do throughout its existence. And that is the principle Mr. Putin seems to be following. And so I think we're stuck with a situation where we have two large, powerful countries vying for regional control. And at the same time, having to balance that with their image. Oh, Russia really doesn't care about their image in the West. So I guess that's more a Turkey problem. but it is a dangerous place where there's no, I think, neutral arbitrator. I think Armenia likes to see Russia as a neutral, or at least the American diaspora of Armenia like to see Russia as a neutral third party that came and said, okay, settle down. But they're not. They're definitely playing their hand here, and they're definitely taking advantage of a rapidly collapsing situation.
I want to also add, look at the map. So if you look at the map, it kind of tells you everything you need to know. How long did it take the Ottomans to take Constantinople? Hundreds of years. And they stayed focused. They stayed focused, and they took Constantinople. Look where we are. Look what we're in the middle of, and what we're stopping. We're stopping this neo-Ottoman hope and vision and ideal. Our position is really a dangerous position. We have to think about the Ottomans and how long they can point to a goal, in sort of that their idea of their pan-Ottoman vision. Just look at our map. I think that's all you have to do. All of this is really wonderful, but if you just look at the map and see what we're squeezed between, and the oil on the other side of us in Baku and Turkey, and also the other thing to sort of look at is the upcoming water wars that are going to take place, and what we have in terms of resources and that. So all we need to know is just the map. If you just see that tells you the story that's coming.
It is really scary because they're exhibiting such remarkable similarities to other imperialist nations throughout history, fascist imperialist nations. Very expansionary verbiage is coming out of their I mean, they already have complete control of their media, especially in Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is smaller, so it's easier. I think what we're seeing what's his name? Aliyev doing in Azerbaijan is, I think, a precursor to a wider crackdown in Turkey, because Turkey recently reconverted the Hagia Sophia into a mosque. It used to be like a symbol of, look how great American influence is, that we got Turkey to turn the largest mosque into a museum, a secular museum where you can respect the history and the religion, but also embrace democracy. That was like the greatest achievement in the region. And they completely reversed it. So it is, I think, an indicator of things to come in Turkey, which really is terrifying.
And look what they're doing in the Mediterranean. Look what they're doing in Syria.
Oh, yeah. Oh yeah, like, I mean, you guys started mentioning Turkey, and I have a galore of things I could tell you guys. I mean, it's, and one thing that, as you mentioned, I really liked was the map. The map tells you everything. I mean, from a first glance, you'll notice that Armenia has no access to sea, which is very important. And we would ask ourselves, well, where does Turkey and Armenia actually have similar interests? Well, you can look at the Black Sea cooperation, meaning that the intergovernmental organization that has countries that are interested in the Black Sea and trade through the Black Sea. Armenia and Turkey are both a part of it. So you have to understand that this region is very economically driven. It's historically been economically driven. I mean, if you look at the Silk Road and where it went through and whatnot, Armenians have historically been in this region, and they've historically run the game in trade. So when we look at the map, you understand that Armenia's trade is very limited. When we look at the map again, it's a very mountainous region, which doesn't make infrastructure that easy, and it doesn't make takeovers as easily as well, which is a very big part of what Armenia's future is going to be in this case, right? With the interests involved, and with countries like France and the United States that are interested in this. Armenia is not the only person they have to talk to, because Armenia has to ultimately get through someone to access that. And when you look at Armenia's biggest ally out of the four corners, I mean, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Turkey, I don't think so. I think Iran's your best ally there. And Iran, being not necessarily the best of friends with the Western world, it's very hard to break a conversation with the Western world through Iran. So, given that Georgia did close off its borders during the war, which essentially suffocated Armenia, and the only way you could get through and bring military arms, if you're Russia, is through the Caspian Sea, 2 Turkmenistan, 2 Iran, and 3 Iran to Armenia, which makes it very easy to point the finger when it's Turkey of who's allowing the guns to come in. So Turkey is in a very advantageous position. It uses NATO to its advantage to play the cards in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. It plays the NATO card in the Mediterranean. And it's as long as Russia's the foe for the Western world, I can't imagine, and we mentioned us being the diaspora here, kind of wanting Russia to be a neutral third party. Well, if we want the US to get involved, how is the US going to get involved? I mean, the direct communication with Armenia is great and all, but you have to go through someone in order to build whatever you're going to allow the US to do, unless it's extracting minerals, which they're already doing.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah. There's something seems to have gone wrong. Our live stream is down.
Ooh.
Give me a moment.
Oh. It might be the IG live limit on sometimes an hour.
Everyone's texting me right now.
We're going to try it again. Okay, I need to get a new stream key. This will take a minute.
No worries.
Oops.
You guys are doing great.
Am I doing good as moderator? I'm sorry.
Yes, you are.
I know to a limit as to what I know.
Very good.
Okay, good.
Good.
Sorry if we're derailing your entire plan by just going off on tangents, Tony. But
No, it's okay.
It's an interesting conversation.
No, yeah. I mean, you guys wanted a conversation. We're gonna have a conversation.
Yeah, this is good. No, don't worry.
When we come back on, I think maybe we should go back to Turkey a little bit, but I think we should talk about this sort of military coup-ish thing that's going on in Armenia, where maybe we should add that in there somewhere, because yesterday I was trying to ignore everything because it was my birthday.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We are so sorry about the delay. There was a bit of an interruption with Instagram's live limits that have caused such interruption to our process. But welcome back to the live, and hopefully people come back and watch and learn some more things about the current events taking place in Artsakh. So, as we move on, a good question that I wanted to bring up was something with yesterday's events. So, like we were talking about the pro and anti-Pashinyan situation, I know I've been bringing it up a lot. It's just the hot topic of the whole entire situation. But yesterday, there were 2 protests taking place at the same time. And as I said, with the division in favor of or in opposition to Nikol Pashinyan, not only can we, what can we understand about the perspectives of both sides, and what possibly, without trying to get yourself politically canceled, what are some of the pros and cons that could happen if we have Pashinyan stay longer, or if he leaves? And along with that, there's a whole military situation in which Pashinyan may demand the military to get involved. So, Professor Mekhitaryan, would you like to begin with that?
Well, the pro or con of one staying in or resigning or having their, keeping their, I don't think we get to say, I think the voters, the people there get to say that. So I think the best way to get legitimacy back is to have a vote, have an election. So every country, no matter what kind of country you have, whether it's an authoritarian regime, democracy, whatever, they all have to maintain legitimacy, whether that's through the threat of force or through elections. Legitimacy has to be maintained. Right now, there are a lot of cracks in legitimacy in Armenia. And so regardless of who is going to be leading, legitimacy must be maintained. So what happened yesterday is there was a reaction to Pashinyan firing a couple of military generals, the chief of staff and the general of staff military personnel. The military came out and put out a letter requesting his resignation or against him, which kind of looked like a pseudo wannabe, maybe kind of Armenian style, I don't know, kebab coup, but I don't, it really wasn't a coup, but it was like this attempted thing that attempted at least to push him out to resign or so forth. If that is the case, that would be trying to like overstep their boundaries, right? Because the military works for whom? The military is not this separate entity that gets to decide things on their own when they feel it's just or what they feel is not just, that's not their job. So if that is the case, there has to be some repercussions for that. But there also has to be some reckoning here where there of understanding that legitimacy has been lost. This was a huge loss. This was not a, this was a huge loss for Armenia, both like territorially, but also our morale or our identity as a nation. So there has to be some reckoning. And, this idea, this beautiful like move towards democracy, like this fresh air that was coming, Eastern European post-Soviet clouds started to lift with the Velvet Revolution in some way. There was this idea of getting out of the thumb and the weight of the oligarchs and people, there was some sort of hope. I think this being demolished completely is a bit much. I think there is hope for Armenia to maintain some of these democratic principles. Like I said, look at our protest movement, our civil society movement. That's pretty robust for this kind of country and this kind of situation. It's not being, clamped down upon, which is what I was expecting to happen. But legitimacy must be reestablished. And I think the only real way to establish that is through elections. I don't know if there's another way to establish that right now. I don't think it's anybody's position, mine or anybody else's, to be like, this person must resign. I think we need to put it up to vote and make decisions from there. And this sort of instability of resigning, the next person coming in, that's what I kind of was starting off with when we started talking, is that there seems to be no options, right? We're like either this or that. We need options. We need maybe a third option. And it seems like a very small majority, but still a majority of people are still leaning. They rather have Pashinyan than maybe going back to the old regime. But that doesn't necessarily mean old regime, oligarchic regime. There's got to be other options. There's got to be a way of broadening our base in some way, right? In any country. And so if we don't do this, there's going to be an erosion, I believe, in the civil society that we have. There's going to have to be some clampdown on civil society, on this robust movement that is happening. And that, I think, will be the most depressing thing to watch from my perspective. So there's got to be some legitimacy gained. And we'll have to see how it plays out. Right now, we don't have answers again. Like in so many things, we don't have answers.
And, just to kind of continue off, what you said as well, with the coup, right? Was it a coup or was it or not? You see the headlines going everywhere, going frenzy with the word coup. Well, it's, Pashinyan described it as a potential military coup, which is where everyone decided to just go ahead and use the word coup, when really it was simply a message from the Ministry of Defense's Onik Gasparian and many others. Now, let's look at this from a general standpoint, right? Opinions aside, like as he mentioned, it's not my job to really have an opinion on this. It's the locals' jobs that have the opportunity to and have the right to express and to express through their vote when the time comes. And what's telling about this issue is the legitimacy, like you mentioned, right? The legitimacy of the candidates in the street, the legitimacy of the history of these folk as well. Given that this issue, as I mentioned prior, is not just since September 27th. No, this goes all the way back until 1994. I would even argue in 1999 when we had the parliamentary assassinations, which is a very swept under the rug concept. I think Armenians have a lot of homework to do if this is their first time hearing about Nairi Hunanian and the 1999 assassinations. I think I'm getting the year right, if I'm not mistaken, with 1998. But there's also years and years of state building we missed out on. And this is the aftermath of it. When you're put in a very difficult situation where you experience the highs of the revolution of the 2018, and essentially brought back the faith of the people in their own democratic governance, which if you really look at it historically, that wasn't possible unless you really tied the branch with Tbilisi and Baku with your neighbors as a Transcaucasian region until imperialist forces maybe in the 20th century. So it's you have to take it from that standpoint and look at the crowd that are out there. And I'm not going to mention names as you mentioned, right? But let's look at the legitimacy. One of the members is the king of interim governments. He comes, leads something, and then he passes it to someone else. Vazgen Manukyan. You have Arthur Vanetzian, who basically is out in the street as well, and it seems like he's not mentioning anything other than Nico leave. Well, okay, we understand that. Most of us can agree that a leader after losing a war should probably step down. But let's look at our option here. Where was that attitude when none of our defense was getting upgraded? Why am I looking at this from 2020 and saying, why did we not activate any kind of activity similar to what Azerbaijan was doing? But then you can mention money. I think we had enough money to at least, upgrade a couple of things, but that's another issue. And if you guys want to look more into it, Foreign Policy Research Institute has a great podcast on it. Look into it. But essentially, we saw from 2006 all the way until 2019, Azerbaijan accumulate $825 million for Israeli weapons from 2006. So let's look at 2006. You have Kocharian, right, essentially, who voiced an opinion in favor of the army's signed document saying to resign Nikol Pashinyan, which is completely overstepping their boundaries. And I'm not saying I don't appreciate the hard work they do, but your place is to guard the border. Guard the border. That's one thing. And if Kocharian and Ser Sargsyan, the whole corrupt leaders of the past, are voicing in favor, you have Khachaturian voicing in favor. This isn't necessarily about the future of Armenia. This is simply about personal issues with this Nikol Pashinyan character, right? And it becomes very difficult to follow what the words are. Even December, January, February, we're 3 months past, and the people still in the streets are in their low thousands. After a loss of a war, after thousands of people have passed, unfortunately. So it tells you about the legitimacy of that crowd. But you're also getting very uncharacteristic activities happening from the prime minister that doesn't necessarily provide the best picture or the image of the government. So you also have a very fair argument on the other side of people who may be protesting on the side of beside the gentleman I just mentioned. And it creates a very awkward position. I mean, if you look at the protesters, there's a couple of thousand on one side, a couple of thousand on another side. You got a couple million other people that are just sitting at home and just like they're confused about this whole situation, not even allowing them to breathe for a second and just think, right? And recent polls came out where there was a certain percentage of, I believe 30% was Nikol's approval rating, and then you had 27% that said none of the above, which is very telling as well. And the poll was Gallup, if it's important, and also Gallup also mentioned there's a high level of Ser Sargsyan supporters in the 2000s, so that's telling as well. And whether that's true or not, who knows? But just giving you the numbers. So it creates a very awkward circumstance when the military has this kind of viewpoint, when really the country's not in complete turmoil, where it's to the point where the military is saying, okay, we're going to stand our grounds and we're going to say something. Everyone's asking us for something. No, it's not like that. And I don't mean to speak on many people's opinions, but this is what we're seeing in terms of from afar away. And the media doesn't do a great job of telling this story, I would argue. And and it goes back to the discrepancy as diaspora members that we have from on an outside looking in of that major buffer of not being physically there and seeing for our own eyes. So that's what I would add.
I want to just jump in really quick and just say there's always, no matter what country, whatever we're looking at, power and privilege does not give themselves up easily. Like, it's very difficult for privilege and power to give itself up. This is always a struggle of power, and that's all it is. I mean, when you're looking at politics, that's what we're looking at, right? Distribution of power and resources. Power does not give itself up easily. So there are definitely people who are genuinely upset. This is a big loss, and they will be upset and want some sort of resignation or change. But I do believe that, like Rich said, there might be a bunch of people from the old regime that are just like very happy to be like, see, we told you so. You see, we told you so. And I think that there's a level of that we can't negate that exists. Like, there is a level of people vying for their positions of power back that will exist in any country. It's not just because it's Armenia. That's just the norm. And there is, at some degree, people who are really disillusioned and upset at this loss and want change. But I would probably argue that most don't want the change that they're looking for is not to go back. I just think they don't know where the forward is right now for us.
And just kind of building off of that too, when we look at the conditions of where we are, it's a failure of policy making for years. And this change that you're looking to see since 2018, and especially with the with the war, losing in the war, exacerbating the issue, you're not going to see the changes of the year and a half or anything. So going off of that, we need to really look at the numbers. We really need to look at the details as to why things are failing, and why things are failing even more now. And one thing that I would like to say is, if the military mentions this kind of voice for Pashinyan to resign, that's not sending the right message to our neighbors, is it? It's not mentioning the right thing at the same. I mean, the opposition rallies are mentioning strengthen our borders. Well, the military just voiced the same things you guys are, and I don't think that's really guarding the borders. And I'm trying to kind of play devil's advocate here to really understand the messages that a lot of these countries or a lot of these administrative leaders are mentioning. Because when Turkey follows up and says we condemn the coup happening in Armenia,
exactly.
Provide
We don't have time. I understand. I really do. We're all really emotional. This is so hard for so many of us. I mean, I really understand the emotions taking over and us losing some credibility because how emotional we've become. But really, when Turkey has to make this sort of comment about us right now, we don't have time. We don't have time. They're telling us what they want to do. We must stabilize and start rebuilding. And start protecting. We don't have the luxury of this debate of who gets to be in power. The Game of Thrones, who gets the throne kind of thing. This is ridiculous. We don't have time for that.
I think there's a couple of things. First of all, of course, I entirely agree that an election is needed, because that's fundamentally what separates Armenia from an uncomfortable number of states in the region. Is at least Armenia tries to maintain a real democracy and not masked oligarchy. That said, there's a couple of problems. I know it was mentioned, but it's worth mentioning again, because this is absolutely abhorrent to me. In the United States, at least, the military does not question the commander-in-chief unless the commander-in-chief gives an unethical order in which they are obligated to disobey that order. With that single exception, you do not go against the commander-in-chief publicly. In the Situation Room, you may give advice, you may give an opposing opinion to the president. But when the president makes a decision, that decision is carried out, and you never air your grievances out publicly, because our enemies see that and they start planning. They will use that to their advantage. So, I mean, Professor, you mentioned it. It's very clear. They're going to take this. They're enjoying this. They're loving this. Erdogan is sitting on his porch watching this all collapse on international television. And he's just having fun. He's having the time of his life. Something I do want to point out, though, and in U.S. history, and I think it relates very well to Armenia, because I see everything through an American-centric lens. I was raised here and whatnot. But in World War II, FDR served 3 terms, was elected for a 4th, and then unfortunately passed away. Back then, it was legal. There was no restriction on term limits. And the same happened in the UK, where they elected, after Chamberlain, I believe, screwed up, they elected Churchill, and they stuck with Churchill. And there's something very important about having a key central figure that unifies a nation and can lead that charge. Because at least in the US, the president is not going to be the one drawing up battle plans. The military, the Pentagon, these are professionals. They do this as a job. They're much, much more intelligent here than the president, and the president will listen to the experts. But having that central figure, that strong guiding hand, is key to keeping the country on on pace, keeping the war machine behind the military going, which, as Rich mentioned, was entirely lacking in Armenia. There was no ramp up. There wasn't enough funds put into place, and so we were woefully unprepared. And while yes, there is benefit to replacing a leader if that leader is not deemed fit, it is absolutely important to recognize that weakens Armenia in the view of its adversaries, and it weakens Armenia in its resolve. Because you just had a contentious election. If you were right now to put the United States in a war where 40% of the country is adamant that the commander-in-chief should not have been elected president, I mean, I would be concerned for the outcome of a war in which the world's greatest military power is in. Armenia is nowhere near the world's greatest military power. And then having that undermining that central unifying authority, I don't want to know what that's going to look like.
And
so for the interest of
Tony, let me just add this one as well, where this is not to say that Pashinyan did not push the buttons. Of course, we saw him mention about the Iskander and and it not popping off literally. And you saw the communication discrepancy with the Russians saying Armenia never used an Iskander, and essentially the Ministry of Defense seemed like they kept on getting the pointing of the finger. And for the past couple of months, we keep on hearing that there were many failures, unidentified failures. Really, if you really look at it, there's still no sources on on an official basis. So we're not going to really know these things until they're declassified. Talks of treason, talks of unnecessary retreats, whatever it may be. At the end of the day, military was not ready. It wasn't revamped in the past 30 years. And it still failed, and you still have an army that went against the commander-in-chief.
Look, we have a mechanism in place, as you were mentioning a moment ago. We have a mechanism in place to actually have a leader to sort of coalesce all of these factions and try to call for election. That's the president in the parliamentary system. They have this ceremonial duty of sort of being the head of state, and they are to pull the factions together and try to come up with some sort of solution to this. So mechanisms does exist. One. Second thing I want to add to it, Rich is saying, we also have the right to look at the military and deconstruct what happened. That is the right of the government. The government has the right to do that. Look at the military and say, these are the flaws. This is what went wrong. This is what we should have done. This is what didn't happen. This is what could have happened, and this is who might have been responsible for it. That is a right and a responsibility. We do have to look at the military and be like, okay, where were the gaps? And right now, so far, it seems like we've been either afraid or unwilling to do that.
So for the interest of time, I do value you guys' insights on this question, but we do have to move forward with the next question at hand. So one of our last questions is, so there's a really, really huge situation right now with prisoners of war. As you can see, a lot of exchange going back and forth with them. Rich, would you like to begin us off? What do you think right now with the situation of the Armenian POWs held in Azerbaijan?
I mean, the unfortunate truth is that Azerbaijan is looking to use it as a bargaining chip. That is one of the most inhumane things I have to say about this, and using it as a bargaining chip. One of the biggest values that I would argue for Armenia is the human factor. The ability to mobilize humans across the world, the ability, our people are pretty literate in terms of, if you look at the index in Armenia, but the human factor is big. And given that there's only, let's say 2.8 million, which I would argue is actually 2.3 million, or maybe even 2.2, given that many of them are working in Russia or whatever it is, there's this aspect of it that even 2 people is too much. And when you have more than 50 captive right now, and we're not just talking about prisoners of war, we're also talking after the war, because we notice that successful because you had end dates of certain date, you had an end date of a certain date, you have to give back some land, but there's also a lot of areas that was not mentioned. For example, if you look at the Kubadli area, the southern region of Artsakh. There's a lot of question marks that wasn't answered during the trilateral agreement. And I understand there's going to be much more. If you look at Sos, if you look at the Lachin area, if you look at, Aravnu, all those areas, it was uncertain for a couple of days where is that going to be that or is that going to be that? And you're not seeing sophisticated land surveying equipment like a technology being used there. No, they're using GPSs off their hands. And personally, with a geography degree that I have and 2 years of land surveying experience, that's not how you demarcate. And it's done very on the fly. And during that time, we noticed that the numbers of people in captivity in Azerbaijan increased. One of them being Maral, which is a very famous, not famous, incorrect to say, but on Twitter, the name is trending because it's hashtag free Maral. So those folks are still not coming back, essentially. And this is a very unnecessary part of the post-war period that tells you, it's very telling of the Azerbaijani government, right? We're focusing on the government here, of using human lives as a bargaining chip. And this is something we've known that's possible to happen since the day we saw the axing of Gurgen Magarian in 2005. And sorry for the trigger, but it's a very valid point. Human life is used as a bargaining chip. It's, and extradited, brought back to Azerbaijan, given medals, high ranking, gave them a house, call it a day. So, it's very important to understand how Azerbaijan operates in terms of intelligence, given that I would argue that it's quite similar to a much more extreme version of KGB in a post-Soviet period. So it's just, it's just unnecessary. And that's what I'm going to say about it. Sorry, I get emotional about this.
I'm going to allow Professor Mekhtarian to say her piece, and then we have to move on to the audience questions, just for interest of time.
Okay, I'll do this very quickly. So Article 118 of the Geneva Convention says that immediately at the ceasefire negotiations, once that is established, prisoners of war must be returned. They are in complete violation of this, but they've been in violation of a lot of things. So they're being allowed to be in violation. Why? This is the question always to ask. Like, why are they being allowed to be in violation of this? Who is gaining this? I know these are bargaining chips, and I know they're using human lives. We saw the beheading videos. We've seen everybody has seen it. They're being allowed to. I think the question we have to ask is, why are they being allowed to? Who is winning? And once we start to excavate sort of that, we'll be able to point fingers to exactly where they belong.
Yeah, I think Professor Mekhtarian clearly stated it excellently. There's all these kinds of events taking place, and we need to consider the fact of who is really the winner of the situation, and why do these take place? How can we stop them? How do we prevent them from continuing on in the future? In the event that this takes place again, how do we prevent any worse situations, not only in the territory, but also as a diaspora? How do we prevent ourselves from getting any of these kinds of situations happening to us? So for the interest of time, Andre, do we have any questions in the live chat we can take for a little bit? Andre, you're muted, by the way.
Sorry, I just put in the chat for them to ask questions. We'll see if we get any. Hopefully we do. We do want to have a good amount of interaction. I know a large portion of the people watching are high school students from Burbank. So we do want to get them as engaged as possible. Here from one Nina El Moyan. Is there anything the diaspora can do to help with infrastructure?
May I take this one?
Whoever may want to begin, you may go ahead for this one. Like at this point, yeah.
For the youngsters out there, I highly doubt you can start a business in Armenia. But if you talk your parents into it, that's a wonderful one. Because Armenia, in terms of the place it's in right now, needs growth. The best way you can provide growth is short-term donation, meaning that if someone needs money tomorrow, you donate. And access of this is, for example, Kuyriks, which is Kuyriks in Armenian, and it's a great source of helping Armenians inside of Artsakh, and as well as Armenians in Armenia. And given that you have now many refugees in Armenia, they're going to need jobs because they're no longer living in the same place. And even imagine moving from Burbank to Wyoming. Are you going to have the same job? Probably not. But that's a stretch. Sorry, I don't mean to make it that big geographic difference. In terms of how you can make a difference, start studying political sciences. And I'm very serious about this. If you're moved about this, you definitely should get into it, because we don't have the, how should I say this, the strength of as much as Azerbaijan does in terms of implementing with the money it has. We need more political scientists out there, and that's just basic. Now, going back to the economic side of this, if you provide jobs for the local people in Armenia, that means you're strengthening Armenia's purpose on how it could provide to the rest of the world. And now that you have a country like Iran that just joined the EAEU, which is the Eurasian Economic Union, which is going to share, a train corridor with Iran, it basically provides Armenia an opportunity to work with Russia more so, because the only way Iran is going to access Russia on ground is through Armenia, and from Armenia to Azerbaijan, unfortunately. So we have to then go back to understanding the economics and the geopolitics of the region. But in terms of how the diaspora can make a difference, is to understand the local political situation, which is where the political scientists come in. And that's when the economics comes in of if you can support businesses in Armenia, and if you can create jobs in Armenia. Like, for example, I have my best friend moved his headquarters from Glendale to Yerevan. He cut the cost by 75%, and he's still giving the same prices that he needs to for the US clients, because it's a digital marketing agency. So, if you have the flexibility to do that, especially in a post-COVID world where a lot of things are going remote, it's a big opportunity for diasporans to be able to make a lasting difference. And that's from, my personal perspective. I personally, what I did was I was the guinea pig for Armenia in basketball. I tried to bring more accessibility for Armenian diasporans to be able to play and represent the Armenian national team, and I did so in 2015 and 2016. Now, I don't think that's enough, but I think it's a proper platform to be able to showcase Armenian excellence through sports diplomacy, which is what my thesis was on. So if you guys are interested in knowing about sports diplomacy, let me know.
Alicia asks, why do you guys think other nations aren't taking action on the war crimes to add an appendix to that? I think France, right? The French Senate passed something like scolding Azerbaijan for their war crimes. With that exception, I don't remember anything else. So yeah, I'll give that question to you guys.
So I guess I'll chime in here and say this kind of goes back to what I was saying a little while ago, sort of follow the money or follow the power. We're not the only, like, if you were surprised, and I think this is not the best way to say it, but I'm just going to say, if you were surprised that the international community didn't react better, didn't react firmer, and didn't react with some sort of sanction, some sort of hard and difficult reaction to the country that was committing, or countries that were committing these war crimes, you haven't been paying attention to world politics. Look at Yemen. Look at what happened in Rwanda. Look at what's happening around. Look at Rohingyas. Look at all around us. There are serious human rights violations that are taking place. When we talk about sort of the international community, we really are talking about a small number of nations, powerful nations, and mostly they will react for two reasons. One, they have some interest in the area, some resource to gain, like what we call the resource curse, some resource to gain, or two, that the sort of public sound, the public noise is too loud to ignore, and they're losing some sort of image war, I guess. Well, we weren't that, I mean, we're loud, but we weren't that loud, and they weren't losing some sort of image war. Lots of bad things happen, and all they have to do is come out and make some sort of statement like we condemn these crimes. The only time you'll see serious action like sanctions or serious like repercussions is when there is something to gain, like resource-wise or political. We have nothing to, we didn't put ourselves in a position where we had something to offer that could have been taken away if we were damaged, if Armenia was damaged or Karabakh was damaged. We didn't have those kind of relations. We didn't create those allyships. Nobody depended on us for anything, not transit, nothing. And And I think that this is the story that happens consistently around the world. It's not just us.
And I think the problem is not only did Armenia not have a reason for countries to protect them, there was a disincentive as well, because the enemies of Armenia do have resources and points of interest to the Western world, and so there is actually quite a heavy push, not even to go as far as admonishing Turkey for their crimes, not even mentioning it, because we rely on our air bases in Turkey to be able to basically strike the entirety of the region. Unfortunately, Turkey is, in geopolitically speaking, the best place humanly imaginable, because they're smack in the middle of all the action. And that used to play to Armenia's advantage back in the times of Tigran the Great. Well, now it's not Armenian land. And unfortunately, it's playing to the enemies of Armenia's benefit. And so we end up with a situation where the United States is saying, well, do I kill terrorists in the Middle East with the air base I built in a country doing terrible, terrible things? Or do I stick my neck out for a small group of people that really the world doesn't even know exists for the most part? It's a terrible, terrible situation. Unfortunately, that's the lens through which the U.S. State Department, at least, is going to make their recommendation to the president.
I just add a positive note in there, though. There are countries that don't have resources, that are smashed in the middle of countries that are hostile in regions that don't function well for them, that have figured out ways to make themselves needed, necessary, whether it's through IT sector, whether it's through industry, whether it's through intellectual capital. There's possibility for us to do this as well. It does exist. We just didn't do it fast enough, or we didn't focus on it. We can. I don't want us to think that we're smashed between these, we're sandwiched in a place that we can't do this. Others have, and we definitely can, I think.
Another question from Ani. She asks, what actions do you think need to be taken in order for Armenia to be better prepared for future attacks? I mean, just my own point here. It does look like they're not done, and that a future attack seems almost imminent. But Rich, I saw you wanted to answer that.
Well, where it should go or not, I'm not going to comment too much on it. But in terms of general ideas, the United Arab Emirates is one of the countries that stands beside Armenia in terms of trying to constrain trying to contain Turkish expansionist theories. There's one thing in common with a lot of the countries in the Middle East is I don't think any of them really want to go back to the Ottoman Empire days. And I don't think any of them really want to go down the route where Turkey gets to govern them, or at least gets to have a big say in the Middle East. So Armenia, for example, participating in the upcoming UAE military-industrial convention is a big thing. Unfortunately, you're seeing this now afterwards, but the UAE has had an interest in growing relationship with Armenia, given that now, if you know the marketing that you're seeing of Yerevan from Dubai is that it's the gateway to Europe, essentially. It's the first stop to Europe. That's one. Two, Indian-Armenian relations need to significantly get better. Significantly. And then that's not even an opinion, that's just fact, basic fact. And especially with the relationship, the bilateral relationship growing between Iran and Armenia, you need to see that, given that you have access through the Persian Gulf. Remember, Armenia is only one country away from having a Gulf or having a sea, and it needs to forge its relationships through that. And if it makes Armenia a vassal of Iran in a sense, then so be it. I mean, Armenia really has been for the past past 1,000 year. That sounds weird grammatically, but I'm just going to say it. Of another entity that has a higher say in what happens with the Armenian people. Now, India is a big reason. One, because you have a new market that you get into Eurasia. Armenia needs to focus on the new market of Eurasia much more than Western ideals. And this is something that as Americans, we may not understand fully to the capacity that we should. But for example, Iran joining the EAEU is a big deal. or looking to join the EAU is a big deal. And Armenia needs to focus on growing its relationship with Jordan, given that Israel did not listen to Armenia's call to cease its selling of arms. Okay, then let's hang up with Jordan then. Because Jordan has a bone to pick with Israel, given that its relationship is souring. It's on the way towards souring, at least in my research. And I think Armenia has much more room to grow. And it's also offering Russia to have extra relationships, because this is the world we live in. If you're Armenia, if you got to see how you can work to Russia's benefit. If you can forge relationships that these countries couldn't necessarily do based off their weird strategic relationship with the US, you can forge your relationship through Armenia instead. And it's almost like a chess piece that has capabilities for another chess piece. So as well as the UAE and Kuwait, or any country really that can offer it's interesting to see where it should help for Armenia in the military world, or even in terms of marketing.
I think all of that is absolutely true. Everything in that direction is open game for us. Even a market like Vietnam, who's doing really well, we have a lot of economic growth that is a potential in that area, in that direction. We just need to start building those ties. This is what I'm saying. Like, India is a no-brainer for us, not only just for the market, but look at Pakistan and Turkey. Do you know, like, there's a lot of potential partnerships and allyships and economic growth possibilities or pathways that can be built. We just need to create some sort of stability so we can stop focusing on the internal, so we can focus on the external, because this is absolutely not over. I want to keep saying that this is not over. They're coming. Like, that's the feeling I want all of us to have. This imminent threat is there, and it's coming. They're telling us. And so we really need to build, like, very quickly. We can't be in this position that we found ourselves in the last few months, in 5 years from now or 10 years from now. So everything in that direction is fair game, and it's open season for us.
There's a arguably larger looming threat that I'm concerned with, because there has been a lot of talk. I'm familiar with the expanding Eurasian markets from a European perspective, because I think it was part of the conversation with Brexit, where somebody brought up, well, the global center of, at least power in terms of commerce, buying power, seems to be shifting away from America. Because America used to be the largest consumer, and that is shifting more and more east, to the point where China is basically dragging the center of the world away from the Atlantic. And what I'm concerned with is Iran trying to take advantage of the Eurasian markets, and Armenia, in a sense, following suit, could play into what effectively is a giant phantom threat that is just looming in the horizon, which is a terrifyingly accelerating China. These guys are poised to become the next Soviet Union in terms of global superpower status. I would argue they already are. But as we are moving away,
they already are.
Yeah, it's honestly, this seems to be a power play between Russia, Turkey, Russia trying to stamp out Turkey from the picture, Turkey trying to be imperialist, and Russia trying to keep its foothold while China is expanding. And then all these other states, all these tiny little, even Iran in this picture is considered tiny, are getting trampled on and being used as a pawn. Effectively, I think what scares me really is knowing that there are very, very smart people working for these governments, for the Chinese government, for the Russian government, for the Turkish government, who are probably sitting in a room right now thinking, how can we use this to our advantage? And if I was in that room looking at Armenia, it looks like a pretty vulnerable pawn right now, especially with the internal turmoil. It is ripe for conflict. and it can be taken advantage by any number of actors. It's something that keeps me up at night, at least.
All right, Andre, are there any last questions that we may take, or shall we wrap this up?
I see no other questions. I mean, oh, I got one more. Hold on.
Okay.
One more, and I think it's a good place to wrap it up on. Alicia again asked, how much does activism, as a member of the diaspora, help further the goals and interests of the Armenian people?
I'll let you guys go first. I have a lot of thoughts to say on this, so go for it.
I'll take the first part of this one. The diaspora has a very unique ability, and for those who are interested in doing more research on it, because this is a very underdeveloped topic, and again, we need more political scientists to bring more literature on this, is diaspora activity. And again, one of my theses that I wrote was understanding the diaspora and how it can operate. You can see this as a case study for the Croatians. You can see this as a case study for the Irish, and certainly for the Armenians. The Armenians are a separate lobbying group of their own. And their placement in terms of, you can look at it through organizations, you can look at it through unofficial organizations, or even just as in a place of leadership. That plays a pretty big role in some cases. Of course, when it comes to physical on ground in Armenia, that may be different. But at the same time, you can't negate the fact that you had millions of dollars pumping in. I'm not sure if it was every day millions of dollars pumping in, but you had a couple of $80 million that we ended up with. Essentially, it covers 2 days of the war, if you really think about it, or 3 days of the war, which, if you grand scheme of things, maybe not as powerful as one would want, but at least it's something. It's something in its regards. It's something in its advocacy, especially in terms of a tech world, and understanding how tech can play to your advantage, right? I mean, Twitter, understanding Instagram, Facebook, and Azerbaijan knew this as well, that they were going to fire back, and they were going to make sure that our online presence was not heard. So this is an area where we need to explore, and we need to really understand in how we can help Armenia. This can bring into tech industry, maybe, but you can also look at how Armenia brings prosperity to Los Angeles in certain industries, which brings interests, right? That's an interest in itself. And we mentioned gold mines and pipelines. Well, in LA, there's various very important people of Armenian descent that will allow the political structure to not just bypass and forget the Armenian issues. Because I guarantee you in Los Angeles, you know what an Armenian is. The issue is on the federal level. That needs to be on the federal level, and that's where NATO comes into the picture. So when it comes to the moment where Turkey screws up, which I could probably see in the future and possibly losing, at least if the Russians are painted as the foe, I can't see that. But if you see in the future, at some point, the Armenian diaspora is going to play a very big role. But the Armenian diaspora is also in a very pivotal point in the history of, I would say, of us living abroad, is moving back to Armenia at some point is a very important factor in this. Because as long as we're Armenians abroad, Armenians living inside of Armenia have much more capabilities of being able to govern a country of their own. And I would argue that ultimately a diaspora's, if you're looking to bring change to Armenia, actually on a fundamental and more tangible perspective, you got to move over there. And that's just the fact of it. I mean, Israel has a great birthright program. Armenia has a good birthright program, and there's no reason why we shouldn't mimic it off the Israeli programs. Because given that many Israelis, even my roommate of college, had birthright, came back. He loved it, and his life changed. So I think as diaspora members, we have to make our own steps and understanding how well we can advocate. Sorry, it went on a tangent a little bit, but that's what I would argue in terms of being a very unique place. And the person I would recommend looking up in terms of research is Khachik Tololian. I believe he's University of Pennsylvania. I'm not too sure. It could be Penn State, but definitely a great starting point for you guys that want to learn more on an institutional level of how diaspora can make change.
I think all of that is great. I just want to add one thing. The activism from the diaspora has been really important. If it wasn't for the activism around the world by the Armenian diaspora, we would not be able to buffer the millions and millions of dollars that Azerbaijan, Turkey spent in media blitzing us. So we were only able to do that for a period of time, not consistently, because now they're winning the media narrative, right? But for a minute they weren't, because we were in the streets in every country, and they could not cover us. Like, everybody was covering the Armenian diaspora in awe of what was happening. And that kind of activism is kind of unbelievable and amazing. And I know everybody was proud watching that, and everybody was moved watching that. But more than being proud and moved, it really buffered for a minute the millions and millions of dollars that they spent in the PR machine to sort of smear us and our story. We are kind of losing that right now. Our narrative is a bit weak right now because we're focused on internal stuff. So we are losing this story. And if you lose the narrative, you lose. We can't lose the narrative, and we're losing the narrative. And I would say, even from out here, if you're writing, if you're a writer, or if you're on Twitter or Instagram, whatever, just keep pushing. We have to have a narrative that speaks to a broader audience, and they are winning right now.
I think there's a saying in politics: if you're not on offense, you're on defense. And if you're on defense, you're losing. Pretty much the problem here is that, as you mentioned, just by virtue of a lack of resources, more often than not, we're on defense. And you're right. We got to keep pushing. I want to talk about something Rich said for a moment, though, about, the birthright issue. I can't speak for everyone, but for myself personally, I see myself as an American first, but as an Armenian through heritage and through ethnicity and through culture. And so I highly value my Armenian heritage and my culture. But I'm an American first and foremost. And so and I'm not the only one, definitely. For people like me, the thought of moving to Armenia is unfathomable because my values are American, my lifestyle is American. Everything I believe revolves around my belief in this country. And so in an element, there's like, it's the land of your forefathers. On the other hand, to me, it's just like, I couldn't even consider that. And so for people like me, I think it's more important than ever to take advantage of the fact that we are Americans first, and to embrace that, and to embrace our heritage and use that to our advantage to further the goals of of the people living in Armenia, and to ensure that they are not ignored by, using our rights and unique privileges as citizens of the most powerful country on the world to continue to push that agenda.
Yeah, so basically, I can't speak really well on the birthright. I've seen many perspectives as to the different internal issues, and at the same time, how we should go about this in a realistic sense. And to be honest, I'm all for realism, because at the end of the day, if we're too optimistic, then some outcomes may not be so well. Hint, hint, wink, wink to whatever could happen next. So with that, I've been to different protests. I've seen different forms of civic activism, and sometimes I question. I say, I'm gonna be really honest right now. Is this really working? Is sitting again? I'm gonna be very honest, very literal. As much as it is getting the word out there, as much as it is teaching something new, is it really bringing enough change, or at least incremental by any means? For example, I've seen people, they would just sit around, well, exactly. They would sit there and they call it, they have laptops, they have hookah, vape, okay, maybe not hookah, but vape, and cards, phones, chargers, and then they're singing. And as
more
much
humiliating
as it's bringing
than
attention
anything.
with only 12 people and 30 so people coming in.
Well, I would argue
Exactly.
It's in the
Well,
strategy,
Tony, you remember
and
it looks
the cars?
it's the
Remember the
strategy that-
highways?
Yeah, I know.
Sorry, I didn't mean
But,
to
Rich,
stop
I'm
you
sorry.
there, but in terms of how the advocacy can be, and this is where the quality can come in, right? Like for example, strategy. I think there was a very good mobilization of protesters at DPL Piper, who was a PR firm for Azerbaijan. You had Mercury, right, one of them as well. And what do PR companies not really like? They don't like bad PR, and that's good work being done. But we must remain proactive. This known, we should have had think tanks catching these information. Like for example, one of the contracts began in January 2020. Why is it that we're all getting together? It's almost like there's a game and you woke up late, but you made it to the game, but you still didn't catch the first quarter, which is a very big part of it. So there's that aspect of it, of where are you protesting? What are you doing? Are you doing it in front of a Starbucks, or are you doing it in front of a DPL Piper, which is a PR firm? And guess what? It was very strategic with some of these things that I saw, where it's not only emailing DPL Piper, it's emailing also the clients of DPL Piper, meaning that Starbucks was one of them, H&M, Puma, all these companies that are with the same representative, representing them is representing Azerbaijan. They're saying, what the heck is going on? Why are we in this middle of the conflict? So when we look at protests and this activity, we need to see the success in it too. And I think, I'm going to shout out my friend Goliath the Great with this one, leading the campaigns, that this is strategy. You hear Tesla's going to send a communication device up in space for Turkey to be able to go from Central Asia all the way to North Africa to have an understanding of not only communication but also satellite imagery. This is insane information that Elon Musk is allowing on the side of SpaceX. And you go protest in front of SpaceX, or you go in front of a PR company that represents SpaceX. So we got to grow up at a younger age. And this is something that unfortunately I experienced in 2008 when I witnessed people die in Armenia from protesting. So, it's insane. But it's the truth. We have to grow up at a quicker pace. Your generation is going to learn this at a young age, and that's to your advantage. It's the location of where we're doing that. So protests can happen, and they have their place in the movement. And you're definitely right. If you're an American first and Armenian second, by all means, it's your choice, and that's your God-given right. So that's where we can put it all in with the bargaining chips, right? Because we can't be reactive anymore. When we have a date, it's like, for example, we mentioned 5 years for the Artsakh peacekeeping program, right? Okay, so by the next 5 years, which I would argue the Russians are not leaving, just how, as you said, but we got to be proactive, because these bot farms made by Azerbaijan didn't just overnight show up. No, it's since 2011. These Facebook bot farms exist since 2013. So, it's very important for us to not react, but to be proactive, for our friends and those who want to help our voice to see the hustle, to see the professionalism. Because a lot of the things Azerbaijan is doing in terms of cultural genocide is on a professional level. And for anyone willing to find more information and on a much more accessible level, hop out of this Instagram live at some point, go into Robert Tarosian's highlight page and check out every single file that you can see in terms of PR agencies for Azerbaijan. Thank you.
Rich, I'm so sorry. Andre, I'm so sorry.
Before you,
but I was notified it's going to end in 4 minutes, actually. The live's going to end really quick. So
all right, let me just say one point, because
Really
this is an important point. There doesn't seem to be a centralized plan, I think, with the diaspora's protests. And that's what makes them, what's so advantageous to them, is they have this government that's making these directives and pushing it themselves. Whereas this is entirely on a peer-to-peer basis. So like stuff like with the protests where they basically blocked, I think it was the 101, where they just parked their cars in the middle of the highway and started waving Armenian flags, stuff like that. You know what they covered the next morning on KTLA? They didn't cover it was an Armenian protest. They covered Armenians block highway. That was the title. And that's the problem, is when you don't know what you're doing and you're political novices, and you just decide to throw a protest together, you end up humiliating instead of actually advancing the cause. And that's my little piece.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching this live panel discussion about post-war Artsakh. If you haven't already, please make sure you follow our Instagrams at acdd.bsa and at Burbank Students to stay informed about what we have coming soon. Once again, thank you all for coming, and we hope that you learned something new from this discussion. Thank you and have a great day.